This, rather funky little thing, is a highly advanced radiation detector. It is actually a gamma-ray spectrometer, and it can do things that even the most expensive Geiger counter could only dream of. This thing doesn't just measure the radiation levels, but can literally identify the actual radioactive isotopes that you point it at. This device is called the RadiaCode 103G, and today we are going to give it a very detailed test. We do need to disclose something: this product was sent to us for free, and for the purposes of reviewing it. I wonder if the company was hoping that their generosity would influence our review of their product. Well, that's never going to bloody well happen around here. So, let's get on and take a look at this device. On this channel, we have resisted the urge to accept sponsorships. Although, to be frank, our viewers are not the type that falls for these types of stupid scams. So when the RadiaCode company offered us a sponsorship, we declined. It just seems to be a little disingenuous to be sponsored by the company whose product we are reviewing. So instead, we asked for a discount for our viewers. After having watched this video, you are interested in purchasing this device. You will be eligible for a $55 discount, which is 10% off of the list price. Anyway, here is the first character of the coupon code that you will need to redeem the 10% discount. And remember, it is a discount that we have essentially paid for by refusing a sponsorship. Right, let's talk a little about what this product is, how it works, and what it can do. As the name suggests, a gamma-ray spectrometer will detect gamma rays. These are photons, just like rays of light, and in the same way, have different colors or frequencies. These different frequencies are normally referred to as energy levels, and measured in units of electron volts. So, a gamma-ray spectrometer is just like a prism, but for gamma rays. And by splitting up these rays, and sorting them into their various energy levels, a spectral fingerprint can be constructed. And once you have this energy signature, it can be matched to a library of isotopes, allowing the isotope in question to be identified. Inside the RadiaCode devices, there is a special crystal which converts gamma rays into tiny flashes of light. A highly advanced light sensor, called a silicon photomultiplier, then converts these minuscule bursts of light into an electrical signal. The type of crystal used in this model of the device is a bit special. It is made from gadolinium aluminium gallium garnet, or GAGG for short, and it gives the RadiaCode 103G a much improved energy resolution. Which is just another way of saying that it makes it better at identifying isotopes. It is also interesting that if you remove this tiny crystal from the RadiaCode device, what is left is little more than a highly advanced light sensor. Okay, let's talk a bit about what the product can actually do. It can connect to a smartphone app via Bluetooth, and it can connect to a PC application via USB. The smartphone application is one of the best parts of the whole package, and it is shared across all of the models of the RadiaCode product range. Within the application, there is the usual display of the radiation levels over time, the accumulated energy spectrum, and many other features, but what is perhaps the most interesting function is the ability to map the radiation levels as you move around. Using this feature, you can produce radiation maps of your local neighborhood, or even map out the areas surrounding a nuclear plant. Using the app, the physical device can be fully configured, you can set up alarm levels and display modes, and data can be captured and saved. Now, let's talk about the PC application. This connects to the RadiaCode device via USB, and has all of the same features and modes as the smartphone app. That said, it is nowhere near as polished as the smartphone application and is a lot more clunky. I have managed to make this crash on multiple occasions, particularly when connecting between different models of the RadiaCode. There are also a few really annoying things about the PC application, but our main gripe is with exporting CSV files. The application exports the data with respect to the channel number, not the energy levels. I know that it is a pretty simple conversion, but why should the RadiaCode customers need to do this each and every time, instead of the RadiaCode engineers fixing it just once? Like all of the RadiaCode spectrometer models, this device uses a 3-button user interface. Even without the smartphone or PC applications, it is very easy to set up and use. But, it has to be said, that it does look a little bit like a blood glucose monitor. And speaking of the industrial design, here is their first spectrometer product, the RadiaCode 101. After which came the 102 model. Later, we were treated to the RadiaCode 103 device. And now, we have the 103G. It really does look like their industrial designer has not been terribly busy for the last few years. Now, we are going to put this thing through its paces, with some pretty extensive testing. Let's see if the hype is justified, or if this is just one of those bullshit products, intended to encourage existing users to upgrade. When the RadiaCode company sent us the product sample, unbeknown to us, they also included a GAGG scintillation crystal. This is the heart of the entire product, and is its main component. We are actually building up a small collection of scintillation crystals. Perhaps, we will make a video about these interesting materials at some point. Please, do let us know in the comments if that would be of interest. This one came with a reflective layer applied to 5 sides of the cube, and the last face is polished. The polished face is used to couple to the silicon photomultiplier that detects the faint flashes of light. When holding this cube of crystal in the hand, we noticed that it is surprisingly dense. In fact, it is about 3 times more dense than an equivalent cube made out of glass. In scintillation detectors like this, the size of crystal pretty much defines the sensitivity of the product. The larger the crystal, the better the sensitivity. The GAGG scintillation crystal used in the RadiaCode product has 1 cubic centimeter of total volume. This crystal has a mass of 6.56 grams. We have seen densities being quoted from 6.5 to 7 grams per cubic centimeter, so this one is at the bottom end of that range. Its density is somewhere between that of zirconium and zinc. So, now the moment of truth, let's blast this thing with some X-rays and see how much light output we get. We need to switch the lights off, if we want to see anything. The light output might look quite intense here, but in reality, it is not even visible in normal lighting conditions. We tried to use a spectrometer to measure the optical emission from this crystal, but when exposed to these X-rays, there simply isn't enough optical energy emitted for this spectrometer to register anything. Given that this crystal is placed just a few millimeters from this intense X-ray source, it really brings home just how sensitive the silicon photomultipliers actually are. Especially as we will typically see about 15 counts per second from it, under background radiation conditions. Another way we can make this crystal fluoresce, is to expose it to some ultraviolet light. As you can see, this creates a lot more intense light output, and certainly enough to allow us to make a measurement with an optical spectrometer. In fact, it is so bright that we don't even need to remove the background lighting, as the output is more than intense enough to drown that out. This is a reference spectrum we found online, from a vendor of this type of crystal. The emission is centered on 540 nanometers. Here is the spectrum that we collected from the crystal fluorescence. This line is the 365 nanometer ultraviolet light that we used to get the crystal to emit a fluorescence peak. Our peak was centered on 547 nanometers, which is pretty close to the reference. The shape of our reference peak is biased towards the longer wavelengths, and this is also very similar to the spectrum that we collected with the optical spectrometer. I'm pretty sure that later we will be able to figure out some interesting experiments for this thing. Today, we are going to test this product with a lot of different sources, and we are going to test it alongside its predecessor, the RadiaCode 102. We have been using the RadiaCode 102 for about a year now, and we know this to be an excellent product. We reviewed the previous version last year, and that video is linked in the description below. So, let's get on and do some testing, and see how these two devices compare. Our first test source is americium-241. This particular source has an activity of about 3 microcuries. We have placed this source in between the detectors. It won't be a perfect test, but we are really only looking for a general idea of the sensitivity. In these tests we will be displaying the measurements in counts per second. Americium-241 is predominantly an alpha source, but it does have some small gamma-ray photo peaks, the main one being at about 60 kilo-electron-volts. This is a pretty low energy level, and down towards the lower end of the detectable range of these instruments. What is immediately clear though, is that the older device collected more count events than the new device. In fact, the RadiaCode 102 seems to be about 50% more sensitive, at least within this lower region of the spectrum. However, count rate isn't the only metric that we need to consider. When we look at the energy spectrum that was collected, we can see a very different picture. Here, you can see that the RadiaCode 103G managed to get far better definition of the lower energy peaks for this americium-241 test source. Now, let's take a look at another radioactive isotope test source, radium-226. This is the pointer from an old Soviet military compass. Radium-226 is also an alpha emitter, and so this device cannot directly detect it. Instead, this detector can measure those parts of its decay products that do emit some gamma rays. What is interesting is that both detectors see about the same number of counts from this source. Well, at least it is close enough to be within an acceptable margin of error, and we need to remember that this is a pretty crude experiment. When we look at the generated spectra, it is pretty clear that the RadiaCode 103G has a major resolution advantage over its predecessor. The radium decay products give much stronger lines on the 103G. And this makes isotope identification a far easier task. The advantages of the GAGG scintillation crystal become very obvious when measuring the radium-226 energy spectrum. Right, let's take a measurement from a sample that contains some thorium-232. This is a piece of a snake oil pendant that its manufacturers claim has some health benefits. Of course it's all just bullshit, but it did give us a way to purchase a test sample of this radioactive isotope. Once the readings have settled down, they are about the same in terms of count rate. So, let's take a look at the spectra that were captured by these instruments. Once again, the RadiaCode 103G shows us why it costs more the resolution is far better. The thorium dioxide within this pendant is usually very impure and contains a lot of the decay products, and these allow us to identify the presence of this isotope, even though it is an alpha emitter. Here, we can see the fingerprint of the thorium-232 decay chain is clearly evident. Now, let's point these instruments at some uranium. This is a sample of uranium ore, which we found at an abandoned mine. Like many of the isotopes we have been able to distinguish, it is an alpha emitter, and we will be able to make a positive identification due to its decay chain fingerprint. Both devices show about the same count rate, so now we need to look at the spectra that has been collected by both of these devices. The difference between the published energy resolution between these two devices is only 2%, but as you can see, it makes a considerable difference. The lines are more pronounced, cleaner, and there are even a few lines that cannot even be seen on the older version of the product. Now, let's take a look at everyone's favorite isotope, cesium-137. This isotope is often used as a calibration test source, because it gives a gamma peak that is sort of in the middle of the energy range for most common detectors. In this case, we are seeing that the RadiaCode 103G is giving a count rate that is about 70% higher than the older model. And, looking at the spectra, we see that the latest model has a smoother curve and a narrower peak. We have previously used this test source to characterize the energy resolution of all of our gamma-ray spectrometers. The energy resolution is one of the most important specifications for an instrument like this. And when we measure the actual resolution, we get a figure of 7.59%, which is very close to the published specification of 7.5%. Given that this was not a shielded measurement, this device is probably well within specification. Right, let's do a few experiments with this interesting device. For this first experiment, we are going to break out the strontium-90. This might seem like a strange thing to do, after all, we are testing a gamma-ray spectrometer, and strontium-90 is a beta particle emitter. But when beta particles, traveling at high velocities, strike solid materials, they release X-rays in a process called Bremsstrahlung. Today, we are going to try and detect these X-rays with our new toy. What we are going to do is to jam the source holder open and then add a sheet of lead between the source and the detector. No beta particles will be able to penetrate this 1 mm lead sheet, so anything we detect will be a result of Bremsstrahlung. Here, you can see the count rate increasing as the detector is brought close to the source. Looking at the energy spectra from both of the versions of the RadiaCode device, we can see a number of distinct spectral features. This continuous part of the spectrum is the actual Bremsstrahlung emission. And this large peak at about 75 keV, we think is the X-ray fluorescence emission from the lead sheet. It seems to line up with the K-alpha lines for lead. And then we have this peak at about 42 kilo-electron volts, that only exists on the spectrum of the 103G version. We will talk about that in a moment. First, we will perform a control experiment, using a different material to generate the Bremsstrahlung emissions. We are using the steel safety door of the source holder. Looking at the spectra captured by the two devices, we see very clearly that this 42 kilo-electron volt peak is still present in the spectrum of the RadiaCode 103G. So, we wondered if this was an X-ray fluorescence peak from the gadolinium atoms within the GAGG scintillation crystal. If anyone has any other ideas about what this peak might be, please do let us know in the comments below. This is tritium, a radioactive isotope of hydrogen. we are going to try and make a measurement of several vials of this radioactive gas. Tritium is an emitter of low-energy beta particles, which are not detectable by a gamma-ray spectrometer. What is detectable is the weak X-rays that are generated when the beta particles strike the fluorescent coating and the glass walls of the tube. Once again, we will be measuring Bremsstrahlung emissions. As soon as our old RadiaCode 102 is brought near to our collection of beta lights, we immediately see the count rate climb. Normally, this is undetectable because beta lights are usually enclosed in a thick layer of plastic that absorbs this weak radiation. But these particular ones only have a thin glass envelope, so some of the X-ray energy is able to pass. Now, let's repeat this experiment with the new RadiaCode 103G. We already know that the count rate is likely to be lower than the previous model. This GAGG scintillation crystal does seem to give lower count rates for X-ray type energy levels. Pretty quickly it becomes obvious that we don't see so much of a count rate increase. So, let's take a look at the spectra that was captured from both of these devices. The first point of note is that this new device truncates its displayed spectrum and won't display any energies below its rated 20 kilo-electron-volts. The older devices display down to 0, so there is more, albeit less accurate data. What we appear to get is an X-ray photo peak centered around 10 kilo-electron-volts. This pretty much agrees with what should be expected. We are considering making a video about tritium and its properties, so please let us know in the comments if that sounds interesting. Now, we are going to look at some dedicated X-ray emitters. This first one is a soft X-ray emitter, designed for removing static electricity within industrial environments. This one has an acceleration voltage of just 10 kV, so the penetration of the X-rays it produces is very low. This next one is part of a DIY project we are working on for another video. It is designed to operate at 130 kilovolts, but we will be powering this with an acceleration voltage of 50 kV. We are working on a composite shielding solution for this tube, but that isn't ready yet, so we will be improvising with some lead sheet between the tube and my human assistant. We will test this soft X-ray source first. The X-ray photons that this device emits are pretty low energy, but it is quite intense. In other words, there are a lot of X-ray photons generated. Immediately, the old RadiaCode 102 device goes off the scale. But the new 103G seems to take this level of radiation in its stride. Just to make sure that the difference wasn't coming from the positioning of the devices, we swapped them around to confirm it. And indeed, the RadiaCode 103G is indeed far less sensitive to these low-energy X-rays. So, let's just take a look at the spectra that was captured from exposure to this source. Unfortunately, the RadiaCode 103G truncates its spectrum at 20 kilo-electron-volts. So, all we really get to see is that there is some energy in its lowest energy channels. The older 102 product shows an X-ray continuum that extends up to 35 kV, which is not correct. This new device shows a lower count rate for low photon energy rays. Both of these products are energy compensated, so when using units like sieverts, both devices give the same result, despite the difference in counts. Let's take a look at the collected spectra. We have tuned the acceleration voltage and the filament current to deliver as few photons as possible, over a 50 kV spectral range. We hope to be making some X-ray fluorescence measurements with this tube, and we want to do that as safely as possible. The energy spectra from both devices look about right for this tube, given the tube voltage and current. We think that this small peak, at about 8 kV, might be a fluorescence peak of the copper anode in the X-ray tube. Well, the RadiaCode company sent me some of their accessories. Perhaps, they were concerned that the Pacific garbage patch might be in danger of shrinking. And so, we thought we would take a little look at this collection of turtle necklaces. Right, let's start with the selfie stick. Things like this are really helpful when hunting for radioactive rocks, especially when you are as old as my human assistants. And I can tell you, I am already fed up with hearing about silly human ailments, like aching backs. This particular one is actually made from good quality materials, and is easy to set up and operate. With the RadiaCode attached, the whole arrangement does look like it would be more at home on a golf course, than in a tailings heap of an old uranium mine. To be honest, we prefer the one we cobbled together, which has an attachment for the cell phone. We found it to be really useful to have the RadiaCode app open, when performing a search. And then, we have this leg band. When walking around, and making a radiological survey, having the detector close to the ground is pretty helpful. But, I am surprised that nobody at the RadiaCode company thought that this thing kind of looks like something that a judge might order to be attached to your ankle. And to make things worse, these things are supplied in bright fluorescent colors, that nobody can fail to notice. It really won't matter how many times you tell your neighbors that you have been working on an oil rig for the last 6 months, as soon as they see this thing on your ankle, they will be making an urgent search of the sex offenders register. So come on guys, the next time your engineers are having a product brainstorming session, please help to provide them with a little adult supervision. And then there is the silicone cases. These are also pretty well designed, but they don't offer any waterproofing or protection from contamination. And to be fair, the RadiaCode product is already pretty rugged without it. Which brings me to my other problem with these cases: they are actually slightly more expensive than the bloody Gamma Scout equivalent. Ironically, all of these accessories were manufactured in the same city that we are based in. It seems that we all live in a very small world. The RadiaCode company has claimed that the GAGG crystal was better at detecting neutrons. Neutrons are something we have tried, and consistently failed to detect. So, we figured we would try again. First we need a source of neutrons, and we have constructed something called an ambi source. This is an americium-241 source, firing alpha particles at beryllium metal. This is a very inefficient source of neutrons, releasing only about 30 neutrons for every million alpha particles that strike the beryllium. So, to slightly increase our chances, we constructed a nuclear assembly, which is actually little more than 10 small americium-241 sources, and a disk of beryllium. That said, it does sound like a very cool thing to be doing experiments with. We have one larger source, which has an activity of about 3 microcuries, and 9 smaller ones which are about 0.9 microcuries each. So in total, we have about 11 microcuries of total activity. Obviously, it will never be better than a polonium-210 source, but it's what we have available. This is the 1 mm thick beryllium disk that we will use to generate some neutrons. The density is a little lower than we were expecting, and we are not really sure why that is. We covered one side of the disk in Kapton tape. This tape is totally transparent to neutrons and completely opaque to alpha particles. This means that we can switch on and off the production of neutrons by just turning the disk around. But, during our experiments, with the cases of both with and without neutron generation, the same materials will be between the source and the detector. As you can see, even though americium-241 is predominantly an alpha source, there are some gamma emissions. We are going to try to moderate the neutrons, using some high-density polyethylene. Maybe this will help, let's see. To improve our chances of detecting any neutrons, we also shielded our measurements using lead bricks. We need to run quite a few different configurations, including replacing the moderator with this low-density foam, which has been cut to be the same size. We are running each of our experiments over a 48-hour period. Again, we hope to be able to maximize our opportunity of detecting some neutrons. We have on several other occasions tried to make measurements like this, and we have a track record of failing with these types of experiments. Switching on and off the neutrons from this source couldn't be more convenient. Just flip the beryllium disk over. We are going to need a couple of baseline measurements without the neutrons being present, to be able to discriminate their energy peaks. Before we discuss the results from these experiments, I want to just touch on one of the problems that amateur experimenters have. What we are talking about here is access to scientific papers. I guess like us, many of you have found yourselves on the wrong side of a paywall when trying to find scientific literature. You humans do have this curious habit of hoarding information. Anyway, one useful site to get around this is called Sci-Hub, and it's free. Just copy the DOI number into the Sci-Hub search engine, and hey presto, there is your paper. We found that about 80% of the papers we wanted to access were available on Sci-Hub. We understand why there is a paywall. For companies like Lockheed Martin, or Google, or Tesla, paying $20, $50 or even $100 for a paper is inconsequential, but for the average citizen scientist, it's a major investment. Anyway, let's take a look at the results from this series of experiments, that in total took nearly 2 weeks to complete. Did we waste our time, or did we actually record any neutrons? Let's first look at the long-term, shielded background measurement. Our shielding isn't perfect, but overall the background count rate was about 30 times less than without the shielding. If we zoom in a bit, we can see this peak at 511 kilo-electron-volt. This is the electron-positron annihilation energy. There is also a peak at about 320 keV, we aren't sure what this is, so if you have any ideas, please do let us know in the comments. And, when we zoom into the X-ray region of the spectrum, we see 2 separate peaks. We think that this one here is the X-ray fluorescence of the lead shielding from background gamma emissions. But, we are not sure of the source of this one, which is at about 32 keV. Again, if anyone more knowledgeable on this subject can share some insights, we would be very grateful. Okay, the first experiment is a measurement of, both with and without, the high-density polyethylene moderator in place. In both measurements, neutrons were being generated, but the low-density foam material will cause negligible moderation. In these results, the unmoderated spectrum is shown in gray, and the moderated energy curve is in white. As would be expected, the results from the low-density material gave higher count rates in this X-ray part of the spectrum. The only anomaly is this small peak around 38 keV. If anyone has some idea what this is, please do feel free to let us know in the comments. Looking in the middle of the energy range, we really don't see anything particularly interesting or different in the spectra. But, here at the upper range of the instrument, we can see some peaks that are unique to the moderated measurement. We would love to think that perhaps these peaks show that we have detected a few neutrons, but again, if you don't agree, feel free to break our hearts in the comments. The second series of measurements didn't use any moderation, we simply switched between the ambi source emitting, or not emitting neutrons. This meant that the source could be closer to the detector. At the low energy end of the spectrum, we see identical results, We suspect that the difference in count rate is due to slight differences in the geometry of the experiment. The source is very close to the RadiaCode detector, so even very small differences in the relative positions can make a very substantial difference to the count rate. In fact, in the rest of the results for this experiment, we are also pretty unconvinced that we were actually able to detect any neutrons. In fairness, the experiment using this small ambi source was only ever likely to yield a couple neutrons per minute at the detector. To be honest, it was a long shot, once you factor in things like the low specific activity of americium-241, the very low efficiency of beryllium as a neutron source, the geometry of the experiment, and the likelihood of an interaction with the scintillation crystal. So, I think we will just chalk this one up to experience, and move on. Well, we have tested the RadiaCode 103G pretty extensively. We have run a few experiments, some of which were even successful, so it's a good time to give you our opinion of this product. From testing, we can see that the sensitivity to low-energy X-rays is not as good as the previous models. It is important not to confuse sensitivity with accuracy. This is an energy-compensated device, so you will get the same measurements, in units like sieverts, as you can expect from any other gamma-ray spectrometer. Next, there is the energy resolution. Frankly, this is fantastic, especially when the small size of the device is taken into account. This makes the task of identifying isotopes a much easier process. We also noticed that the device sensitivity was better than its predecessor, for the detection of higher energy gamma rays. One question we get a lot in the comments is which model or product do we recommend? This is a very tough question to answer, because it just depends on what you actually want to do with a radiation detector. What we will say though, is that this variant costs a lot more than the other products in the range, so unless you have a bloody good reason to buy it, consider buying one of the other models instead. But if you are intending to buy a device to go hunting for radioactive rocks, or want to go searching for radioactive antiques, or perhaps, if your hobby is conducting nuclear physics experiments, then this device might be a good match for your needs. And if your requirements do not necessitate such a level of precision, then don't waste your money on a device with such a high specification, it just won't give you any benefit over the other models. On the subject of pricing, let's just take a quick look at the price and performance of a few spectrometers. We are going to use resolution as a simple metric of performance. First, we have the RadiaCode 102. We have two of these devices, and they are our weapon of choice when it comes to measurements in the field. This device has a specified energy resolution of 9.4%, and we have confirmed this with our own tests. Next, there is the old KC761A. This gamma-ray spectrometer is more expensive than the RadiaCode 102 model, but has a lower resolution. It should be mentioned that it does have some other features that the RadiaCode products don't have. Then there is the RadiaCode 103. We have never tested this model, but it seems to sit nicely between the other two products in the range. This is the KC761B. It has about the same spectral resolution as the 103G, and like the other models shown so far, uses a cesium iodide scintillation crystal. It's a great device, but is more suited for people with some experience in the subject. And then we have the RadiaCode 103G. As far as we know, this is the only model of consumer-grade gamma-ray spectrometer that uses the advanced GAGG scintillation crystal. Of the devices in this list, it is the most expensive. I guess what it comes down to is this: if you need both high performance and the convenience of something that will fit in your pocket, then perhaps it is a price worth paying. Okay, So here is a message directly to the RadiaCode company. This is the fourth product that you have produced that uses the exact same form factor. I am certainly not criticizing the performance of your products, they are easily the best in this class. But, there is another company that was once considered best in class, but then forgot to innovate. So, unless you want to end up in 30 years' time, flogging a dead horse, perhaps it is time to create something new again. It's not like there aren't any innovative startups that are viewing your dominant market position with very envious eyes. Now, let's talk about those accessories. Starting with the selfie stick. If you want to go rock hunting, a setup like this is absolutely essential, assuming you don't want to end up a deformed hunchback. And who knows, maybe it will even help you to improve your golf handicap. The silicone rubber case makes the product feel quite chunky, but in fairness we are familiar with the product without it. Personally, if I were investing this much cash into a device like this, I would probably buy it, to protect my investment. And as for this damn thing, well, we will leave it to your imagination. In case you missed those discount coupon codes, here they are again. And that is the RadiaCode 103G. Anyway, that's all we have for you today. We hope you enjoyed our little video, or at least found some parts of it interesting. If you think we deserve it, then please feel free to give it a like. And you could always hit subscribe, if you want to see more content like this. In a change from our normal practice, we have enabled YouTube advertising. We are saving up for a camera. All of the photography you have seen in our videos has been captured using a cell phone, the limitations of which is starting to limit the kind of content we can produce. We wish to express our sincerest gratitude to the following viewers for their donations towards our camera fund. This is still a hobby channel, so we can say what we want, and YouTube's algorithm can go and get f***ed. Thank you for your time.